We'll just go by one.
Please come. Thank you. Please.
No, sir. Good morning. Warm welcome to RIS. This year we are celebrating 25 years of ASEAN India partnerships, starting with 1991 if you count. So 20 years of partnerships is very colorful. Throughout the year, we are doing so many activities. RIS had a very, very important event done in the middle of last year. EAM, Honorable External Affairs Minister, she addressed to us. She came here and we had a full house. Support of the Director General of RIS, we had a fantastic event done. Now, this is today what we thought that RIS has been contributing immensely on the ASEAN-India relations starting in 1992, if you count our first official contribution through research findings. So Ambassador Devre, who is with us today, sir, told us, why don't you disseminate all our findings in a form of a full international conference. So that is the origin. He motivated us. Thank you very much, sir, for everything. So with that note, we start with the inaugural sessions with us, Director General RIS, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, a very, very dynamic leader in our organizations. Then we will be listening to the opening address by our Vice Chairman, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Special address will be given by Excellency Ambassador Suryo Dipro, Ambassador of Indonesia and India. And Ambassador Priti Saran, because of her preoccupation and some important work, she said that she won't be able to make it. But certainly, we have an External Affairs Ministry representative. He will be speaking or he will be communicating her message. We will be releasing the compendium in the morning. We will be giving a copy to you. And then we will make a short presentation and ending by the Board of Thanks in next 40 to 45 minutes. With that note, may I hand over the mic to our Director General, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, to take care of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabir. Good morning to all and a very warm greetings for New Year. As Prabir mentioned, this year started at RIS with a lot of work on India-ASEAN partnership. Just last week, we were together, and there are participants here who were with us in Jakarta. We were there with the Foreign Minister from Indonesia and also our own External Affairs Minister. We discussed several issues, so this is a sort of continuing work here this week. I'm extremely grateful to Ambassador of Indonesia, His Excellency Mr. Suryo Dipuro, for sparing his valuable time at this point of the year and joining us this morning. I'm also grateful to our Vice Chairman, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who has recently joined RIS as our Vice Chairman. I'm so grateful to Ambassador Sudhir Devre, who actually nudged us for this event. And he made two suggestions. One, when he was telling us about this seminar, I was justifying our seminar last week in Jakarta. And he said, no, something should be done in Delhi itself when India is going to host the summit. So this was one. And second, his idea was that whatever papers and books that RIS has published so far on India-ASEAN should be brought out. And then we put our documentation team together. And in last 2 weeks, this team really overworked. And since 1992, when India joined as sectoral partnership, RIS has produced n number of papers and volumes. Fortunately, we could collate them, and this morning it would be launched. This is in a pen drive, so we have saved several trees and papers, and this has been made available to you. Friends and colleagues, as we move forward, the very idea of India-ASEAN partnership was addressed at RIS, as I said, and this documentation would reveal all that in terms of our priorities, in terms of our focus, and the multidimensional take. It's not just trade and economy that we have talked there. The idea of science, technology, innovation, the partnerships that are coming up within this region, and India-ASEAN partnership with other actors within the East Asia Summit process. So that wider perspective has been very well captured. The idea of culture, which has been there all through, got further traction since 2014 when we got the new government in, and with the External Affairs Minister's own emphasis, the focus in our work program on culture, education has evolved. Recently, the ASEAN India Think Tank Network meeting, my colleague and head of the ASEAN India Center, Prabir himself presented an excellent paper on education sector cooperation between ASEAN and India and the university connect between the two regions. The issues related to services sector. Somehow, when we talk of RCEP and stalled negotiations, our perceptions go in terms of India's interest in services exports and ASEAN interest in goods exports. That is not the scene. And we had excellent presentations in Jakarta, which brought out the fact that it is not just India which has interest in services sector, but if you see exports of ASEAN countries, they range from 37% to 75% of the services. So that's the preoccupied emphasis in the export basket of all the ASEAN countries. And there are 4 major ASEAN countries, including, Your Excellency, Indonesia, where the share of services sector has multiplied. Philippines, Singapore, of course, are in the higher range of 67 to 75%, but Indonesia itself is more than 50% in the export basket. So services is one area where all leading ASEAN economies and India, they have common interest. So this is one area which emerged as extremely important in this, and this has several imperatives for our cooperation. Our cooperation for evolving mutual recognition agreements, our idea of our commitments that are there in GATS, what is it that we can do, at least minimum to what we have committed in GATS to each other, what we can extend there. Singapore, of course, is almost 75%, but then there are issues that we can collectively address. Second issue is in terms of investment. And if you look at investment, there was an excellent paper presented in our network meeting from a scholar from Vietnam who presented about 169 projects that India is implementing in Vietnam. And hardly these facts come to our notice. So India as an investor in CLMV region is little known to some of us. So if 169 projects are coming out and they are implemented in Vietnam by our private sector across different areas, it is absolutely important for us to see how we can really move forward and consolidate some of these windows that are there. ASEAN's own initiatives like the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services and similarly on investment, we need to see what kind of dimension it can provide for our cooperation in terms of strengthening the value chains. The actors like Japan, they are also playing an important role in the region. They are focusing on our Northeast through several projects that are there. Prime Minister's emphasis on Act East policy is also opening up windows in terms of how Act East and our development priorities in Northeast can converge. And this convergence would provide the natural traction that we have for CLMV countries. So how what we announced in the last budget in terms of a special purpose vehicle for investing in CLMV countries can be leveraged in terms of partnering and moving forward. Friends, the proceedings of the AINTT, the ASEAN India Network of Think Tank, the 4th meeting is there in your folders. As you would see, this report, which was launched by the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and her counterpart from Indonesia, was presented. It's there in your folder, plus the pen drive that we would be launching this morning. So with these words, I warmly welcome all of you, all these scholars from ASEAN who have traveled. I'm so thankful to Sutipant for joining us despite of his health, and I'm grateful to Prabir for going right up to Bangkok and knocking his door, getting him here. This has really worked. Sutipant's presence here is absolutely helpful for us to get India-ASEAN partnership in a larger context going. I would now request Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Vice Chairman RIS, for his remarks, and then colleagues, we would move forward with the agenda. So, Ambassador Mohan Kumar.
Thank you very much, Director General Sachin Chaturvedi, Mr. Prabir Dey, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you. I'm the real outsider in this group, if you like, because I've never served in ASEAN. Despite 36 years, I served mostly in the West. But you will appreciate that sometimes an outsider's perspective can be helpful. So it is against that backdrop that I speak with some trepidation, because every other Foreign Service officer, retired or serving, who's sitting around the table is far more of an expert on ASEAN than I can ever be. So you will please cut me some slack. I will begin by saying that I'm extremely happy that Director General Sachin Chaturvedi and Professor Prabir Dey have organized this, because I can think of no institution more qualified than RIS to organize a conference like this. I'm grateful to Ambassador Devray for suggesting and pushing this idea, because I genuinely think when I read the papers given to me, RIS thought of this 1992. So my slogan for the day, and please bear in mind what I told you about me being an outsider, is that we've, I think, looked at East, we've acted East, and maybe now we should merge East. So that is my slogan. And when I say merger, I'm not talking of a geographical merger, but connectivity, economics, trade, investment. So I think that's the logical step in my view, okay? So I think it's clear to me that we have a strategic partnership, and the strategic partnership always has this connotation of somehow maritime links, security links, and taking care of what we call the global commons now, which is cyberspace, counter-terrorism, and climate change. Without that, you cannot have a strategic partnership. But I will now talk about what I expect as an outsider from this one-day conference. I think this conference is absolutely justified in celebrating the trajectory of ASEAN and India. It is true we started off as a sectoral partner and then proceeded to becoming a strategic partner. So it's a partnership that is, I think, extremely crucial. What I would nevertheless like the conference to do is also be somewhat self-critical. You know, this FTA that we have had with ASEAN is, I think, fantastic. It has led to an increase in trade which can only be described as exponential. The question, therefore, from our side, which should be addressed by the conference, is why is India not using more of this FTA? They are using it. Why are we not using it? I think that is a question that I would like experts to address. Similarly, the services and investment agreement that we have signed with them is not yet fully implemented, I am aware, but it is also something that we should look at in terms of what India is getting out of it. Broadly speaking, and I know that other people far more qualified are going to speak after me, I'll tell you what I expect from this whole strategic partnership, at least in trade investment terms. I think the deal for me is that India has to become part of the global value chain. ASEAN is part of the global value chain. It's at the center of the global value chain. We are at the margins of the global value chain. And one of the things for me as a strategic objective for not only doing the FTA but also the services and investment agreement is for India to become part of the chain. And ASEAN cooperation should take us towards that goal. I also believe that our products and services, especially products, I think should conform to higher TBT and SPS standards, technical barriers to trade and sanitary, phytosanitary standards. That is something that we expect as an outcome. We expect transfer of technology, state-of-the-art technology from ASEAN. So how much of these goals have been fulfilled? What can be done by both sides to better achieve these goals? This is India's perspective. In return, of course, ASEAN has this amazing access to the largest growing market in India. I think they've exploited it already very well, and I think we should discuss how they can do it even better, how they can be part of the Make in India story and the rest of it. So that is, for me, really the purpose of this conference. The purpose of the conference can be celebratory in part, but it has to be, I think, self-critical so that we can find ways and means to strengthen the partnership further. The world is in full transition, and very much the story is that of Asia. I believe the trade, investment, connectivity, and the strategic architecture of Asia has not been fully built yet. It is also in transition, and I expect ASEAN and India to make a contribution to the development of this architecture. And the only way ASEAN India will contribute to this architecture, I believe, is by bringing security, stability, and predictability to this architecture. That's very, very important. There are a lot of changes happening in Asia, but if we are talking connectivity, if we are talking maritime routes, if we are talking trade and investment, ASEAN India, I think, have this amazing opportunity to bring stability to the region, which is the fastest growing region in the world. So that is something which is an imperative. If you're looking for economic growth from Asia, you need stability and predictability. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And I see the ASEAN-India strategic partnership playing an important role in this respect. So with those words, I agree that I've somewhat strayed into the geopolitical sphere. I couldn't help that because that is a natural instinct. I know less about ASEAN. I know more about the geopolitical sphere. But I realize how important this element of this partnership is. So with those few words, extremely happy, Director General Sachin Chaturvedi and Professor Prabir Dey, to be part of this conference. I look forward to learning more as the day progresses. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks, Vice Chairman. I would now invite for his remarks Ambassador Suryo Dipuro, Ambassador of Indonesia in India. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody, and those coming from outside of India, welcome to New Delhi. Ambassador Devare, Ambassador Kumar, Professor Chaturvedi, Dr. Prabir Dey, participants of the conference, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It has been an exciting few weeks, at least from the perspective of the Indonesian Embassy. It was mentioned before, last week we had the Joint Commission meeting. Earlier this week, we had the first India-Indonesia Strategic Security Dialogue. We are having Indonesia's Minister of Defense coming to New Delhi next week, and then all of it leading to the India-ASEAN Commemorative Summit. So it's very busy, a very busy period for all of us, but it's also a productive and welcomed one. So it's a good kind of busy. As we celebrate the 25 years of India-ASEAN relations, we are in a sense celebrating not only the adding of the years into this bond of friendship, or even the adding of landmarks to this partnership. So in addition to ASEAN's 50 years, also 15 years of India-ASEAN summit level engagements, and 5 years of strategic partnership. But we are above all celebrating the changes that have been taking place since 1992. From a fractured Southeast Asia, having only come out of the vestiges of superpower proxy wars into one under the single embrace of ASEAN, playing a central role in the Indo-Pacific region. from an India that was only beginning to undertake reform measures that would totally transform the country into a dynamo that it is today, a major power exercising leadership in the region and in the world, reaching out to Mars, and implementing a constructive, all-directional foreign policy. And we are celebrating a relationship that was 25 years ago largely symbolic and sectoral into one that is substantive and comprehensive, from India that was looking east into India that is acting east, and through which we seek to enhance the security and prosperity of all in the Indo-Pacific region. Like Indonesia's regional outlook has evolved in significant ways. In 1992, our focus was primarily Southeast Asia, and it was the correct approach because the region was nearing the end of Cold War turmoils. Today, we have developed a complex foreign policy for our complex neighborhood. In Southeast Asia, we proactively promoted the community, connectivity, and maritime agenda. In West and South Pacific, Indonesia, in collaboration with a number of other countries, we established the Southwest Pacific Dialogue and the Coral Triangle Initiative. We engaged the Pacific Islands Forum and the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and we established bilateral relations with almost all Pacific Island countries. And to our west, the Indian Ocean is to our west. We translated our re-emerging consciousness of our Indian Ocean heritage into a more active role in the Indian Ocean Rim Association, such as by chairing IORA 2015 to 2017, and holding a first ever IORA summit last year. The emergence of Indonesia's maritime fulcrum doctrine, on its own an imperative for our own interest, is an evolution of our role in the region and a response to evolving regional and global structure and architecture. So change is constant. As we celebrate the first quarter century of India-ASEAN relationship, we also have to consider how to leverage this relationship to address changes that are taking place before us, where some countries are emerging and others are aging or in relative decline, where some are expanding their spheres and physical presence, others retreating behind borders, where some are seeking to strengthen international law, international norms, and institutions, others flouting them, and where amidst of globalization, identity politics, radicalism, and extremism seems to be on the rise in many parts of the world. As India and ASEAN share the vision for a regional architecture that is open, inclusive, sustainable, transparent, and rule-based, we should continue to work for an ecosystem that will be positive and supportive, not one based on mutual suspicion and mutual perception of threat. We agree that it is ASEAN, its centrality, and its related mechanisms upon which we build and strengthen the norms and institutions of the Indo-Pacific region. In fact, the region has few, if any, alternative platforms acceptable to all for norms building. But it is also for ASEAN to exercise and not take for granted its central role built on its unity. The Indo-Pacific is also primarily a maritime region with Southeast Asia and Indonesia at the center. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea will thus only grow in importance. We have, and we have to support and strengthen it, because in no other point in human history has people and their economic activities gone to sea in greater numbers than today. People, ships, activities on and below the water and on the seabed are growing and will continue to grow. India and ASEAN also recognize that connectivity shall play an increasing role in the Indo-Pacific region. Our challenge, as is our opportunity, is to build layers of connectivity across all spheres, whether it is physical, regulatory, or people-to-people connectivity. Ambassador Kumar just now talked about India being part of the regional and global value chain. I think a greater connectivity will support such a vision. The other challenge is how to ensure that various visions of connectivity can be mutually inclusive and mutually supportive in this common space that we share. Everybody brings something positive to the table. We need to work together to minimize any kind of downside of respective visions of connectivity. Finally, allow me to congratulate the RIS on the release of the report of the e-compendium of RIS publications on ASEAN-India relations. This will be a trove of information treasure and serve as a reference point for all of us in building this relationship. I wish the organizers and the participants of this conference all success in their deliberations. Thank you.
Thanks, Excellency. Thanks for bringing on table India-ASEAN partnership and its larger context in Indo-Pacific region. And I think that's absolutely important, both in terms of norm setting and also ensuring how rise of economies in the region is peaceful and is contributing to collective gain of all the economies, and the fact that strategic significance of ASEAN centrality would also help in ensuring peace and tranquility in the region. Given the growing importance of maritime security within the region, you very rightly emphasized in terms of the role that IORA can play in the region. I'm extremely glad to mention to you, Excellency, that RIS and IORA Secretariat would be signing an MOU later this week with the Secretary General of IORA being in Delhi on research partnership. And this you very rightly emphasized in terms of how ASEAN can continue to play that constructive role in terms of we collectively moving forward. I would now request Chairman of Research Advisory Committee of RIS, Ambassador Sudhir Devre, who has served in the region and has great efforts in terms of contributing to shaping the RIS work program in AIC, ASEAN India Center, but also our overall connect with the region and particularly focusing on trade and economic linkages. So, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chaturvedi, Ambassador Suryodipuro of Indonesia, Vice Chairman of RIS, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Dr. Prabir Dey. I'm indeed grateful to Dr. Chaturvedi and Ambassador Mohan Kumar as well as Prabir Dey for very kind words, and also for taking this suggestion so seriously and working almost overnight to organize such a large seminar in which we have distinguished participants not only from India but from a number of Southeast Asian as well as countries from Europe. It is particularly satisfying to see that the area of interest for this region has now expanded. As we get ready to welcome on our Republic Day 10 ASEAN heads of state and governments, we, I think, need to look at very briefly at our stage of relationship with this region and particularly ASEAN, because it is indeed a remarkable milestone that we have followed a policy which has been consistently adhered to, and I think is by and large a happy and a very promising story. Now, India's Look East policy I would say relationship with ASEAN was a sine qua non. Without that, we could not have a look or later on Act East policy. And I distinctly recall when we were negotiating with the ASEAN Secretariat as well as ASEAN countries way back in 93, 94, 95, 96, those years, I was personally involved in these negotiations in in Jakarta. ASEAN would often ask us, what is it that India would bring to the table? There was a kind of an asymmetry between the presence of ASEAN countries in the region as compared with that of India. You will be surprised to know that for years at that time, India was not even regarded as an Asian country. Asia ended in Thailand or in Myanmar. So it was an uphill task. And to answer the ASEAN, I think India made several commitments. And these commitments were largely to ensure that India will stand for the stability and security of the Asia-Pacific region in general and in ASEAN in particular. India signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation with ASEAN. India fully subscribed to the ideas of unity and centrality of ASEAN. India also offered to ASEAN its opening of the large Indian market and providing the Indian experience in democratic governance or HRD or capacity building, science and technology in multiple areas. I think that was the beginning of this dialogue partnership and the ARF. Additionally, the areas which were of mutual interest was, of course, maritime security, given the fact that more than half of ASEAN is archipelagic and maritime, and India has deep interests in that field. Economic integration, I think one of the key points of India-ASEAN interaction all these years. So this has really grown over the years. Now, when we talk of the Act East policy in contrast to or in evolution of the Look East policy, what is the difference? To my mind, the commitments which India made, to which India adhered to very religiously and scrupulously all these years, and they were also in mutual interest, have today been converted into India's national policy. I think India's foreign policy today is so closely interlinked, or in fact, Act East policy, I would say, is a main plank of India's foreign policy, in which India's domestic policies are also involved, given the fact that we are paying greater and greater interest and attention to the development of our Northeast, which is the bridge between ASEAN and India. The term Indo-Pacific, which has now gained currency, I think in a way also incorporates India's outlook, and that is one of ASEAN's outlook to this region. And in this context, I would say even ASEAN-India relationship or India's participation in the Quad, in which ASEAN countries are not there, but the participation or the even functioning of Quad is embedded in our partnership with ASEAN, or even the IORA, or the subsets, sub-regional arrangements like BIMSTEC, Ganga, Mekong, all these form part of that larger Indo-Pacific concept in which India and ASEAN have taken some kind of mutual commitments to side by each other. In that also, India's support to ASEAN for the following of the international laws in the South China Sea figures. So this is the broad common outlook in which India and ASEAN are going to work in the coming years. And finally, I would only say, given the typical characteristics both of India as well as that of a number of ASEAN countries, I think our own governance, both in India as well as in these countries, with regard to handling our multiple identities, our diversities, our pluralism, I think that will be a factor of common interest to both as we start to developing closer and closer people-to-people contacts and greater interaction between our two societies. So these are some of the views I wanted to share on a very happy occasion when RIS, which as was stated earlier, I think is probably the first organization in India which started engaging with ASEAN and has consistently over the last 25 years supported India in ASEAN partnership. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ambassador Devre. Now, as we request you to launch the e-compendium, colleagues, there are almost 120 files in this e-compendium, and the size of those files is 1 gigabyte. So it's a huge collection of last 25 years that RIS has worked on India-ASEAN. So it's a moment of great pleasure and privilege for us to get all of that material together. Of course, some of the books which came out from professional publishers, which have their own copyright, that we could not include, only the titles are included. But most of the other papers which RIS churned out, they are all here. I would request the excellencies on the dais to launch it, and then I would request my colleague and head of the ASEAN India Center, Professor Prabir Dey, to make a brief presentation of what all it contains with his vote of thanks. But first, the launching of the pen drive. So, Prabir, if you can just quickly tell us about the pen drive.
Well, yep. If you look at the today's the whole day proceedings, we have 3 sessions. First session after this is about the transformation from Lookist to Actist. 1992, officially Lookist policy was introduced. And then the post-launch, we have a session on economic relation, and the last one is about kind of in the way ahead, the next 25 years, next 50 years, kind of that's what we will be debating. All the sessions have been actually drawn, and if you see the compendium which will be distributed to you very soon, we actually RIS took the lead for heavy studies on ASEAN, not just ASEAN, also on EAS and many areas, as ambassadors Devre rightly mentioned, also Director Generals. So what I will do quickly, just just give you some reflections on our studies that what we have done. But before that, you need to quickly look at what's this year's 25 years. If this illustration is clearly visible for you, maybe I can just go through that. 1992 with the Lookist policy we introduced, and then all the way 25 years in 2017-18 this time we will be celebrating, culminating our celebration into a summit in 25th. So 25th of January, we will have a 25-year celebrations, and then followed by the Republic Day celebrations the next day. So in between, we have several things. FTA signed, special fund introduced, services trade and investment agreement signed, fund like 77 million dollar for CLMB, et cetera. All these are one by one actually came out from several of the studies that the RIS initiated. So what if I quickly look at what we have done in this USB drive that you will be getting. We have the first study that we have done in 1993. That's what the study by Mr. V.L. Rao, Professor V.L. Rao and Ram Upendra Das. There's an occasional paper on India ASEAN. There is a formal study in 1993. And 1992, India joined as a sectoral partner. And 1992 also the Lucas policies came in place. And then the first book, I mean, I'm surprised, the 1992 I passed out my master's from the Calcutta University. But I found this towards an Asian economic area. It was edited by our founding Director General, Professor V.R. Panchmukhi, and Rehman Soman, who is the chairperson of Center for Policy Dialogue in Dhaka. And it was came out by Macmillan that time. And so many interesting papers, not just trade and investment, also in development aspects. So this was beginning and by the founder, Director General of RIS. So if that's the, we started with such, and then if you look at the number of studies, we did 72 post FTA. FTA we signed framework agreement 2004, implemented on 1st January 2010. So if you split this FTA, because RIS contributed many studies, consultations, support to the ministry on the FTA process. 72 is total in number, and it reached a peak when if you see the year-wise, the breakup, the publications, this doesn't count our official inputs to the ministry, because ministry asks so many inputs from us, and many of our chairs are here, and I know that we have been dealing with them. But when the Director General Nagesh Kumar, who was the Director General, that time it reached a peak, like we haven't yet crossed that, which is in 2004 and 5, we had a publication 9 in each year. So this is the trend. We started with 1993 and 2018. And if we split the types of publications, we have an occasional paper, 3, discussion paper 39, which is a major chunk of our ASEAN-related works, which is 55%. Book like this, we have 11 in number, and several reports, 19 reports. Most of the reports actually went to feed the government policy makings. Air connectivity, maritime connectivity, FTA, and also generating more studies, more initiatives at track 1 level like MGC, Mekong Ganga Cooperation, and recent one is India, Myanmar, Trilateral, IMT, TC. Subjects cover, if we look at basically these 72 studies are regional integration, but we looked at the FTA, trade barriers, some studies on the NTMs, several bilaterals like Vietnam, Laupedia. It has several studies on FDI, investments, connectivity. We have dealt with the sectoral issues like science and technology, innovations, agriculture, biotechnology, ICT, energy, governance issues. Also, it lead to generate sub-regional cooperation we looked at sub-regional cooperation like CLMB, MGC, and the cultural and historical links, which is added much later when Ambassador Samsharan was here, the chairman, and we have done several studies on cultural and civilizational links. That way, 3 Cs, that is a very popular term, the commerce, culture, and connectivity, we have extensively covered in the studies. Last slide, what sort of policy makings that we have done. After all, RIS is a policy research institute with an academic support. Now, directly we know that, I am not going to tell the exact what policy is introduced, but we found that 6 broad areas is policy making coming from RIS. One is trade and investments, FTA and post-FTA evaluations, dealing with trade barriers, connectivity, development cooperations, culture and civilization links, and then ASEAN India Center, because RIS activities in 1992 has actually led the government to set up the center at RIS. So these are the 6 major development we found through our activities which fit the government and also to RIS itself. So thank you very much and listening to us. So we'll be moving towards next whole day. Looking forward to your participations and comments and deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabir. Thanks a lot. Now we come to an end of our inaugural session. Would have a tea break and then we would come back. We are almost on time actually. It's 10:30 and it's time for a tea coffee break and of course for networking. I also particularly want to thank excellencies from different missions here in Delhi who today have joined us. I am thankful to Ambassador Indonesia for joining. So thanks a lot, sir. Now we break for tea and coffee and would come back at 11. Thank you.